Good morning. We're going to get this summit started. Well, actually, I guess it started yesterday. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Greg Mint, Executive Director of Northwest Environmental Business Council, and we are the co-presenter, the co-host with Business Oregon. So we've had a long history as an environmental association working with Business Oregon, and so it's great to be back in person. We were doing this the last couple of years virtually, so it's very good to see so many people in person. And for those that we were only meeting virtually, it's really good to actually see you face to face. So I just have a few announcements before we really ramp up and kick off the program today. One is conference app. We do have a printed schedule, but we're always trying to save a little bit on paper. But if you have not downloaded the app, it's Guidebook. It's easy to download the app. There's a code. It asks for a passphrase, which is OR Summit. And all the speaker information, the schedule is right there. You can have that on your phone, your iPad, etc. So don't forget about that. But we also have printed copies of the agenda out at the registration desk. Another thing I wanted to call your attention to, on the agenda, initially we had two sessions. They were two, what I would say are feedback sessions or roundtables that we were going to do with the University of Oregon. It was sort of almost like a fifth track, if you will. One was increasing capacity for infrastructure investment. The other was bridging the digital divide. Those we decided to make virtual at another date and time. So if you were interested in those and you're wondering what happened to those, we're going to make those digital later and in a virtual world. So go to the Business Oregon table in the back of the room and just sign up for that, and you'll get information about when those will be and make sure you can be included in those. I think most of you may be familiar with the facility now. All the rooms are out the doors to the right, all the breakout sessions throughout the next couple of days, and then all the plenary sessions and meals will be in here. What I would like to do now is introduce the governor.
Hello everyone, Governor Kate Brown here. Welcome to the 2022 Brownfields and Infrastructure Summit. On behalf of the state of Oregon, Business Oregon, and the Northwest Environmental Business Council, thank you for making the time to join us. We are at a crossroads of major economic and infrastructure projects, such as water, roads, and facilities, which will greatly impact the economic and social health of our state. No matter what form infrastructure comes in, as underground pipes, bridges, roads, or broadband, it is truly the bedrock of our society. We need to always keep in mind that just as build systems and natural systems are connected, infrastructure and economic resilience also go hand in hand. Oregon's infrastructure needs are already being shaped by climate and population changes. How we invest today will determine the legacy of a vibrant economy and livable environment that we will leave for the next generation. As we all know, our infrastructure systems are showing their age. The good news is that with the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Oregon has a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to proactively address our infrastructure needs, not just reapply a Band-Aid to keep things going. It's essential that our infrastructure investments are prioritized to provide the most leverage, are done in a way that lifts up our most vulnerable communities, and are strategic to provide the backbone for future investment. Regardless of what session of the summit you choose, I'm hopeful you will engage in the discussion. Your backgrounds and talents are vast and diverse, from elected officials and community developers to engineers and financiers. You are all here because you have one thing in common: a desire to find cost-effective, innovative solutions to meet the infrastructure needs for the communities in which we all live, work, and play. For this, I thank you. Enjoy the summit, participate in the conversations, and thank you for stepping up to help Oregon.
If you're going to see a slideshow, and I'll cue that up so it just continues to run, because without their support, we really can't do events like this. But the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality has been a partner since the beginning of this summit. And I want to introduce someone to kick off this summit and introduce this session. Chris Marco, Program Coordinator for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. So Chris, would you come on up and I'll let you take it from here.
Good morning, everybody. Chris Marco, Program Coordinator for DEQ's Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Thank you all for coming here to Bend, beautiful Bend. It's great to be here. It's great to be here for the 4th Annual Infrastructure Summit, the 3rd combined with the Oregon Brownfields and Infrastructure Summit. And thank you all for the work that you do. Communities, as our governor said, you are all the folks that are doing the work, that are going to need to do the work, and we're going to need to do this together in terms of the investments that are coming for infrastructure from the federal government, from the state level, and you're all working hard, and it's appreciated. So thank you for that. I just want to talk very briefly about DEQ and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. We're a proud sponsor of this event, as Greg mentioned, and we focus on financing water quality and infrastructure projects, wastewater, stormwater, watershed restoration, irrigation modernization. We have a broad range of eligibilities. So think about our program when you're thinking about a project. We can fund planning, design, construction, all of that. We've got a booth in the back there. We've got several DEQ staff here in the room, and call us out. We'll be involved with some sessions, and we're a resource for you. I also want to acknowledge that we're living in unprecedented times as far as infrastructure investment. You may have heard of the bipartisan infrastructure law. Yesterday there was a session, a pre-conference session that focused on that funding stream. There's also American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, funding that's come down from the federal government, and there's congressional directed spending and a whole host of other programs that the federal government is investing in for infrastructure. A once-in-a-generation opportunity, unprecedented investment for the long term in infrastructure. So we're going to talk more about that throughout the conference. Those are opportunities to look for in the future, in the coming 5 years and beyond. I also want to acknowledge that this is a special time. This past week represents the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Clean Water Act. A long time ago, when rivers were catching on fire and there was pollution of our waterways across the country, Congress stepped up to pass a long-term act, the Clean Water Act, for water pollution control to ensure that our waterways across the country were protected. We work under that program, under the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, to help ensure water quality and infrastructure. And that continues, and with the bill funding, that's even more investment that's building on the successes over the past 50 years under the Clean Water Act. I'll also acknowledge that this is 20 years since the Brownfields program was created. We were also talking about almost 20 years of the passage of the Safe Drinking Water Act. So these are monumental legislation that is having lasting effects that we're continuing to work on and work under to invest in infrastructure and brownfields. I'm very proud to be here today as a sponsor. I want to thank the Northwest Environmental Business Council and Business Oregon. We've worked together, we've worked very hard. Business Oregon staff has worked really hard to put on a great conference. We have a great showing. Thank you all for being here. And I'd like to introduce Karen Homolac, who's the Brownfields specialist with Business Oregon, who's been a leader in organizing this event and will be passing on the moderating session of this first plenary session for the conference. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for the work that you do. Have a great conference.
Yes, it's live. Good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to see so many people here. I hope you had a chance to enjoy breakfast, and I'm very pleased to be able to serve as the moderator for this kickoff plenary session. I think we're going to have some very interesting information shared with you, because we have two gentlemen here who have been integrally involved in working on the semiconductor task force with the governor's office. So I have on my immediate left Andrew Desmond. Andrew is the Director of the Economic Strategy with the Oregon Business Council and leads the staff work behind the Semiconductor Competitive Task Force. He has been analyzing policy issues since the Business Oregon Council in 2015. On the far left is Dan Diaz. Dan has over 15 years of experience in economic and community development, real estate development, and land use entitlements, land use planning, public policy, and public-private partnerships. He currently serves as the Director of Economic and Community Development for the City of Hillsboro, and in his role, he leads efforts regarding economic development, land use and transportation planning, permitting and development services, and affordable housing. He also serves a primary role in industrial site readiness and downtown site development. So we're going to kick off this plenary session with a couple questions, and from there we're going to, if we have time permitting, open the floor to questions, if any come to mind as you hear what we have to discuss. So let me get my first question. It's here somewhere. Somebody gave me too much paper. So Andrew and Dan, you have both played roles in the Semiconductor Competitive Task Force. What did the report find around this opportunity, and how might it tie to the topics of this conference?
Yeah, so I guess I will start with that one. And first off, just good morning, and it's great to be here, and thank you all for being here. It's also great to be next to Dan Diaz, who clearly has a much longer CV than I do. So it's great to be humbled up here this morning based on that introduction. So related to the Semiconductor Task Force, so there's a couple things that we found. So first, that we just have an absolutely extraordinary opportunity for economic development here. So the Boston Consulting Group, a national consulting firm founder, suggested that over the next 10 years, chip companies could be investing upwards of $280 billion nationally to resolve global chip shortages and to reshore chip supply chains for national security purposes. So we also found that Oregon has 15% of the national chip workforce. So if we assume that 15% represents our market share in the national semiconductor industry, then if we were to get 15% of the national $280 billion investment, that would result in $40 billion invested in Oregon over the next 10 years. That's an extraordinary level of investment that would result in tens of thousands of permanent jobs created, almost half of which would be held by folks with high school or community college degrees, scores more in the construction industry, and literally hundreds of millions of dollars for public tax revenue, state and local. So really an extraordinary opportunity. The real meat of the task force, though, wasn't just oogling over the size of the opportunity, it was really figuring out how we are going to seize that opportunity for Oregon. So it really came down to 5 things, a couple of which are really most pertinent to this meeting. So the first, we need competitive incentives. We're seeing a lot of states put out very, very robust packages, and we think that we need to be similarly bold. Smart, but bold. You're seeing some crazy numbers out there, some of which our analysis suggests probably don't pencil, but we still need to be bold. We need faster permitting times when it comes to certain clean air regulations. So the key to note here is that this isn't about relaxing the regulations. It's just about making sure that they move swifter in terms of the times for companies to receive permits, and making sure that those timelines align with the timelines that the companies have to actually make their investments. Third, we need to be investing in building out a talented and diverse workforce pipeline, and thank you to the governor and the legislature earlier this year in passing the Future Ready Oregon package, which should help in a very significant way. And relatedly, we need to nurture innovation, and in particular investing in some of our public research universities. But I think probably most relevant to this conference is related to industrial land. And the finding that we need a lot more buildable industrial land in the places that the industry wants to be, and very, very soon. So the task force found that we have a very severe shortage of development-ready industrial land in the Portland metro region, where we think a lot of this activity is likely to occur. So, for example, we looked back at what happened in the microelectronics boom of the 1990s to kind of give us a sense of what demand might look like going forward, as we think we're on the cusp of another 90s-like investment boom. So we found that during that time, we needed 2,000 acres of industrial land to enable the billions that were then invested. In contrast, the task force found that today, we only have 82 development-ready Tier 1 acres in the Portland metro region that would be suitable for semiconductors. So that's a pretty significant gap, and really kind of underscores the scope of the challenge that we're facing here. So in terms of the recommendations that the task force had, first is that we need to invest significant sums in site readiness to kind of resolve our chronic shortages of buildable industrial lands, both in the metro region and across the state, for semiconductors and for all of our industries, particularly in manufacturing. And then the second piece is that we need to be open to looking at ways that we can make our land use system more nimble, more responsive, and faster in the face of extraordinary but also time-sensitive economic opportunities like we have with the CHIPS Act. We know that CHIPS Act applications for CHIPS Act incentives are going to be opening up in February. These dollars are extremely front-loaded, which gives us a tremendous amount of urgency to act now to seize the opportunity. So it's a modest agenda, but one that we think is necessary to seize this extraordinary opportunity. So.
Dan?
Thanks, Karen. Good morning, and again, good morning to everybody here today. Very exciting event, and an honor to be up here. And I also want to thank Andrew and OBC for their work on this particular effort, and Andrew really framed this up well. We are first and foremost competing with 49 other states for this opportunity, and in some regards competing with parts of the rest of the world. And so while we need to be acting urgently, I don't think we need to be hair on fire necessarily, but we also have to have ice water in our veins, because being thoughtful, being intentional in this work will be critically important. I want to emphasize too one of the last points that Andrew made, which is extremely relevant to not only the discussion here this morning, but the overall discussions happening at this conference. And that's the point around site readiness. And it cannot be underscored enough as it relates to capturing this opportunity here within Oregon and the various communities that make up Oregon. Without site readiness, we will be impeded in the ability to bring these financial, social, and equitable economic development opportunities to bear here in our own state. Both brownfield remediation and infrastructure development will play a key role in this work, but not necessarily equally. Brownfield-focused work is critical in that it provides economic, social, and environmental benefit. I don't need to tell this room that. All of you are very familiar with that work. But it's important to note, for example, Hillsboro just recently received a $500,000 planning and analysis grant to evaluate a series of brownfields within our downtown, where we're seeking to find reinvestment and repurposing a variety of vacant sites. I want to thank Carly Antonini and our team who's here today for leading that work on our behalf. But brownfields provide some limitations as relates to this specific opportunity. First of all, they can often take far too long to some of the time benefits and needs that Andrew alluded to. Second of all, many of the industry entities that we're engaging, especially in this one industry, do not find the potential stigma of going to a previously contaminated site or one that is in the process of cleanup as part of their corporate image. And so we try to work very actively to reassure them of those benefits, but that is a barrier and impediment of this work. And then lastly, the time impacts and operational cost impacts. Many investments are seeking to be made over the next 2 to 3 years. And so these sites have to be ready within that time frame. From our past experience, sometimes getting brownfields up and ready in that time frame is a very big stretch, and one that we cannot speak with confidence as we engage the industries on that front. So please don't take those words as discouragement for this work. It's incredibly important in the brownfield remediation space. It needs to happen. We just need to be realistic in terms of the role it plays in addressing this immediate opportunity that Andrew framed up. In turn, we must focus also on infrastructure and site readiness, as Andrew mentioned. It will take a coordinated blend of public and private sectors to make that opportunity a reality here in Oregon. From From a public standpoint, we know funding will be available from the federal level with the CHIPS Act and conversations that have already been commenced at this conference around the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. And the state of Oregon will also need to be continue to utilize its tools and seek additional infrastructure funding tools to both blend and match against some of those federal funding pieces, but also to meet specific requirements and needs that arise throughout Oregon communities. Programs like the Special Public Works Fund and the Immediate Opportunity Fund grant can go a long ways in terms of that infrastructure site readiness. It requires advanced planning. It requires an understanding of what's needed to serve projects and sites, especially those that are attracted to these industries. And so I think it's imperative upon all of us, and especially with our state partners here in the room, to continue to evaluate and assess and preserve those programs that are in place today, seek ways in which we may be able to enhance them, and then also be open-minded as new infrastructure needs or challenges arise to find programs and solutions to meet those needs and opportunities as well. There are also local tools. I was talking with a few city colleagues from different jurisdictions this morning, and we have to be thinking at a local level as well. Where and how do we fill gaps that maybe the federal and the state level funding programs do not meet? And where and how can we get creative at a local level to meet our individual communities' needs or desires or constraints? So these funding approaches and the associated infrastructure must be paired with needed land capacity, as Andrew mentioned, and within communities that are able to deliver success upon these opportunities. To have infrastructure and no land capacity it does not create the same ability for these companies to invest, and similarly having land that cannot be served also does not create a rich environment to capture this opportunity. So if we're thoughtful and intentional with identifying and aligning these public funds with industry-attractive locations, then we position Oregon for maximum engagement and leverage from the private funding and investment side to capture this opportunity. So in closing on this question, Karen, infrastructure delivery and addressing the land use capacity needs are where our focus must be the strongest on this topic.
Thank you. And as you were speaking, both of you, a word kept coming up, site readiness, and how do we proceed in infrastructure? And so I'm wondering if both of you could take just a minute to speak a little bit about what site readiness really entails. Instead of the broad sweeping infrastructure, are we talking pipes in the ground? Are we talking about other types of infrastructure that's not normally associated with sort of that hard type of pipe in the ground, wire, that sort of thing?
Yeah, thanks for that follow-up. I think this is one I look forward to sharing my thoughts at the stage today, but over the course of the next couple of days too, with all the experts in the room, I think we all have something to contribute on this front. Site readiness, really, I think you have to look at both sides of the same coin. On one hand, you have to have sites that are going to be attractive to the industry and purpose use. That's aligned with our state land use goals and planning policies of making efficient use and effective use of urbanizable areas, in part so we can protect the rural and open space areas that make our state so unique and cherished. And so those sites have to be industry reflective. They have to be in locations where the industry wants to be, either proximate to other industry players, proximate to assets and amenities, whether that be municipal services or workforce or housing. But really at the core to site readiness is you have to have sites that are clean of wetlands, for example. And that'll be the other side of the coin I'll come back to here in just a minute in terms of the environmental protection and mitigating those impacts. But that have services to them. Understanding these industries, what do they need? Semiconductor, for example, water is a massive need. Water is one in which our state has a resource there that is relatively abundant, and we have great track records of being able to make that water largely available. So you have to have water, sewer, the traditional infrastructures. Reliable power, especially for some of the industries we're talking about here today, is also critically important. We have great power partners across the state that are not only seeking to provide adequate power capacities, but continue to try to drive ways in which we can have renewable power, which is increasingly important for both our community's goals around sustainability, and we see some of these key target industries also aspiring to that as well. And then from the flip side is that once you have sites, are the sites really adequate, and are they going to be environmentally sensitive? If you have industrial lands that are designated for some of these uses that may or may not be industry responsive, and hopefully they are, then you have to be sure that if there's wetlands or floodplain on the sites, those are either accounted for and netted out, or there's a way in which you can have a sensitive mitigation plan put in place to again balance the environmental impacts of that while also delivering a net buildable area that again will come back and meet that industry's needs. So those are a few of the different items in terms of how we approach it. And really site readiness is having those things. In the last piece you'll hear about a little bit later, I think this morning, is the timeliness of that as well. We cannot have those site conversations starting to happen when the businesses are needing to make locational decisions. We have to have sites ready for those businesses to consider that are attractive, so that way we can demonstrate to them there's at a minimum a plan in place to deliver that infrastructure, if not largely the infrastructure available in the first place, to enhance their decision-making and opportunity to be here in Oregon rather than elsewhere across the country or across the globe, as I alluded to earlier.
Dan taught me everything I know about site readiness, so I'll let his answer lie.
And I think that's a perfect lead into perhaps the next question that I have for you two gentlemen. So if we were to go beyond any one industry, how can we best translate those findings and implement from the Semiconductor Task Force and implement them across Oregon to capture the opportunities that you've identified? And recognizing that not every community will have the same thing, and that how can they be mutually supportive and may perhaps provide benefit to either the region or the state, given what they do have available to support?
Sure, yeah, I'll take that one first. So I think the big point to make here is that the formula to unlock the semiconductor opportunity is essentially the same formula to unlock the same for all sorts of manufacturing uses and for all sorts of other economic opportunities, which is really just essentially getting back to the fundamentals. So, you know, the needs are the same whether it's semiconductor manufacturing, car battery manufacturing, metals manufacturing, food product manufacturing, wood product manufacturing. You know, we need ready-to-go parcels of buildable industrial land, that tier one kind of that Dan alluded to. So I have on my notes here a chart from a report that Metro and Partners did back in 2014, looking at acreage requirements for various traded sector industries. So they found that competitive acreage required for regionally or nationally scaled clean tech is 50 acres. Globally scaled clean tech is 100 acres. Heavy industry or manufacturing, 25 acres. General manufacturing, 10 acres. High-tech manufacturing, 25 acres. Though we think that that number is significantly larger, at least as it relates to semiconductor. So the point being that we need buildable and ready-to-go sites across the size spectrum. But as I alluded to in kind of my first remarks, we need talented workforces that are trained for kind of this new paradigm of advanced manufacturing. We need affordable places for those workers to live. We need strict but speedy permitting processes. We need to nurture our innovation ecosystem. And I think this point is really, really important because we don't think that the opportunity is really just centered in the Portland metro region. We really do think that there's a vast opportunity across the state. So if you put the CHIPS Act aside for a second, we've got the general reshoring trend as globalization seems to be in retreat for geopolitical reasons and because of supply chain snarls that we've seen over the last few years. Then there's the historic investment that the Fed's made in the Inflation Reduction Act to build out our clean energy future. Then there's the federal infrastructure package, which we've alluded to here. Putting all those together, $1 billion opportunities for the state of Oregon that will have commensurate similar levels of job impacts as we just talked about for the CHIPS Act opportunity. So, you know, the opportunity for Oregon is vast and the formula is basically the same. It's really just about, you know, hitting the fundamentals. So,
Karen, if I can add.
Oh, don't touch the bottom.
Are we on? Don't touch anything, all right. Start to use that, that's about my height. So I want to build upon a piece that Andrew really just said that hit home on a couple fronts, and really this is a statewide conversation. And that's that many are not aware that the semiconductor industry in Oregon, largely anchored by Intel, and we hear a lot about that, but has suppliers in various manufacturing businesses in 12 different Oregon counties. 12. That's all over the state. In this example, as I was coming into the conference and thinking about, okay, what are we going to say to a whole room of really smart folks to really kind of shed a different and important light on this, and I was driving through Redmond, and I see the BaseX Solutions facility there just off of the highway. And that, for those that aren't aware, BaseX is a manufacturing company here that does both manufacturing and research and development in Central Oregon, and they're making a variety of air handling and cooling systems that are going in to a whole host of really advanced type of facilities. They're, I believe, just completing an additional expansion up to 200,000 square feet, or about a 15-acre site to some of the number of Andrews throughout. But it hit me that when I'm back home in Hillsboro, I see basic product all over our community, coming in and out of a variety of users and sites, manufacturing locations for computer electronics, going into data center locations where we're continuing to see the advancement of the digital economy and digital age. And it hit me yet again in a very real versus a philosophical standpoint that here's the manifestation of those rippling, multiplying manufacturing effects that we have across the entire state, and how so many different Oregon communities have a stake and opportunity in what we're talking about here today. It also highlights to me that we can drive more opportunity off of that model. Our state manufacturing economy is expansive and it's linked. We were a leader in manufacturing before many of the policy and global trends that Andrew mentioned as a state. And we are positioned, if we so choose, to continue to advance and capture the wage benefits, the investment benefits, the tax revenues that come out of that, if we put the appropriate pieces in place. I would also like to come back to your question about the fundamentals and capacity. To support manufacturing facilities, whether they be for microchips or potato chips, wood products or biopharmaceuticals, or the many other amazing goods made in our great state, we have to have sites and facilities that can support these industries, similar to what Andrew just touched upon. This group is very familiar with this topic. Many use the term capacity in these conversations. I just used it probably, 5 times in my last question response to you, Karen. But I think it's really important, especially when you have experts like that are at this conference, that we really be explicit and intentional about what we mean by capacity. Because our policies and our programs have to understand them and have to reflect that opportunity. So bear with me, this is going to be a little one-on-one, and many of you are experts in the space, but I want to touch through very explicitly some of the different capacities that are in our minds when we're evaluating the situation and how to best prepare and capture it. First is resource capacity, and we've talked about that with water. We heard a little bit earlier in terms of clean water, and what is our capacity there, or sewer infrastructure? What's our capacity as a state to provide broadband access, and at what speed levels? That resource capacity is largely an economic benefit and an opportunity strength for our state, if we understand it and deploy it accordingly. The second type of capacity that also comes up is that of resource capacity. A little bit different than what I was just talking about, but a subset of that is the land capacity piece. And I've alluded to this, so I'm not going to belabor it much more this morning. Happy to answer additional questions later. But as Oregon has a unique land use system that originated in the 1970s, and at the time was intended to support the state's 2 most critical industries at that time, farm and forest. Here we sit nearly 50 years later, and I'm not entirely sure if we have a land use system supportive of the needs of the state's critical industries that apply today, to what Andrew mentioned earlier. We have a strong and good land use system, but it is in need of some refreshing to make sure we can make timely and informed decisions, back to that balance of hair on fire, ice in our veins, but that can be positioned to be responsive to massive shifts economically. We are taking multiple business cycles and decision cycles to make land use decisions where businesses are taking months to years to make that investment decision. There's a significant disconnect occurring there. So if communities do not have the appropriate land capacities I alluded to earlier for industry, different sizes, locations, proximate to other amenities, as I mentioned, then we will be disadvantaged collectively in this opportunity. We will need to rely on both infill, underutilized sites within each of our urban areas, but we absolutely have to have that blended and paired with smart greenfield sites as well. The last one is, second last, is financial capacity. And this really gets back to some of the funding pieces we heard in the opening remarks this morning, some of the pieces we've made today. Is there the funding capacity with that blend of federal, state, local, and private to then deliver upon the infrastructure needs that we have? And I think we have state agencies that are very focused in this, Business Oregon, DEQ, others that are putting us in a position to be successful with some additional push, with some additional effort in that space. We have many sophisticated local jurisdictions that are also taking steps. I was just up by Juniper Ridge the other day and seeing some of the advanced investments that Bend is making up there. You know, that type of thinking at a local level is positioning us for a greater opportunity and success. We're doing some of that in my own community as well. So having the financial capacity, whether it be for the industrial side, and then pairing that also with the financial capacity to support on the housing side, come back around to the same goal in the prosperity piece for Oregon. And then lastly, and I won't belabor this too much further either, but we've already touched on it today and it cannot go, said enough, is that time capacity. We sometimes from a government standpoint will think about, okay, look at the time it's going to take us to align the politics, to draft the policies, to figure out the funding deployment. We do not always have that same type of time capacity when we're sitting with those industry and those business shoes, or those hiring decisions that are being made, or those investment decisions being made. And so we all need to challenge ourselves to be cognizant, whether on the private sector side or the public sector side, what is the needed time capacity for that partnership and for this opportunity to really work. So not all communities have or need the same thing in the capacity space. Just like each industry or business will need some things that are the same and some things that are different. This is where we cannot limit one community based on another, but instead should support and evaluate where each community is at, where their capacity needs may be, adequate or lacking, and then seek to align and address them to position for success given some of those target industries.
Great. You said everything that I was going to ask you a question on.
Yes.
I love it when they do my work for me. But it's really true. I mean, we operate in a circle. Everything is dependent on everything else. And so what I'd like both of you to do is to take a minute now, and because we've discussed so much, and it's a lot to take in at 8:30 in the morning on a Monday, and I realize some of you drove all over here and probably got up at 4 in the morning to do that. So thank you. But I'd like you to take a minute just to maybe taking in mind what we've discussed and your understanding of the challenges, constraints, and opportunities. What final words would you like to share with this group?
Yeah, I would start by saying that economies are often path dependent. So growth in one industry often begets more growth in that industry or related industries, and vice versa. So decline in one industry often begets more decline in that or related industry. We find ourselves at this extraordinary, almost maybe an unprecedented opportunity between all the federal resources that have been deployed over the last couple of years to change our path for the better in a way that we in Oregon are making the products that secure our national security, that are also securing our energy future, and making sure that we are the makers of the sustainable technologies that make sure that we are avoiding climate cataclysm. But the thing is that we know that we have to be bold to secure these opportunities. As Dan mentioned, we're competing with 49 other states for a lot of these opportunities, whether that's chip manufacturing, car battery manufacturing, or what have you. And so far, at least on the chip side, we know that we're a little bit behind what other states are doing. The good news is we know what we need to do, just a matter of doing it. And I feel extremely optimistic that we're going to be able to put that together in 2023. So,
from my standpoint, I bring it back around to the people in our communities. We pursue this opportunity not simply for the financial investment, that's hugely important to enable other things that our state and our communities desire to do, or to say we won these opportunities purely. We pursue it for the equitable economic opportunity it brings to Oregonians, Hillsboroans, Bendites, residents from McMinnville, wherever you may fall. And in our work locally, that continues to manifest itself when Governor Brown, Senators Wyden were revealing the State Semiconductor Competitiveness Task Force final report at Portland Community College. There were multiple students in attendance who said, I'm a first-time college attendee in my family, a recent immigrant family that's moving in. And we got to talk to them, and not only they are enrolled in a microelectronics program at PCC, they're also working radar shift at Intel, getting on-the-ground experience and a career that has significant growth potential for them. In some cases, those employers are supporting their additional education. And so that ability to bring infrastructure conversations back to Oregonians' focused conversations is where this is the most important. I also think about the governor's recent commitment to future-ready Oregon that was talked about earlier, to invest in our workforce, and the current workforce seeking to upskill and transition into a more stable industry or career path, or the future generations taking their first STEM classes, where the PhD students will be using the recently announced supercomputers at Oregon State University doing advanced research on climate change and global warming augmentation or improvements. All of those come back to what steps are we taking to put the infrastructure in place to build upon and advance this opportunity. And lastly, I can't help but think if we don't have the capacity in all facets of the word that I've talked about this morning and you've heard us discuss, to support this industry between those amenities, between the housing and the housing choice and affordability levels, between the water and the land and the transportation capacity, then can we truly position Oregon, our state, and her residents for that equitable economic opportunity now and for future generations to come. And so I hope we can, but I think a lot of that is in the work that we all have lying ahead of us.
It's in each of our hands, that's for sure. We have a few minutes, and I'd like to open the floor up for questions, if there are any. I see one in the back there. Please stand up. Do we have a mic?
Grab it.
You'll probably hear me. Hi. I was so curious around the capacities that you talked about, because you did mention the capacities around workforce, and I don't know if you're including that in the resource capacity. But as you know, just as it takes a long time to get land ready, it takes a long time to get workers ready to seize the opportunities. And I was wondering, just for both the state of Oregon folks and for you, who is kind of managing that coordination and that vision to make sure that we have a workforce pathways by the time that we're actually building these facilities and staffing them and coordinating around? I was just curious, like, who's holding that piece of the CHIPS Act? Because the CHIPS Act actually is probably the most, I think, conscientious and investing in workforce than even BIL and the other investments, and it has a lot of resources for local communities around science education and investment in schools. So I was curious, who's kind of coordinating that for the state of Oregon and keeping on pace with what we need to do?
Yeah, sure. That's a really, really great question.
Can you repeat it, sort of?
Oh, God.
Summarize.
It was a very good question around capacity, workforce, CHIPS Act, and how are we going to get from here to there?
That's right.
Did that summarize it well? Okay.
So it's a really fantastic question. So obviously the Future Ready Oregon package that was passed in 2022 is going to be contributing resources in a major way to this. OBC so far has kind of been a central convener for the semiconductor task force, and then its various subcommittees, one of which that we have on talent and workforce. That was, who are the co-chairs? President Lisa Scari from Mountain Hood Community College, and then Dr. Nagy from OIT. So OBC is continuing to kind of play a convening and coordinating role as we continue to look for continued investments in the 2023 legislative session to build on the Future Ready Oregon piece. Also, under the Future Ready Oregon was provided some language for development of industry-specific consortium where community college players, community partners, universities can come together to figure out what the pipeline, or how to build the pipeline, whether that's in the Portland metro region or in Eastern Oregon. Hillsboro actually recently put in a grant request to do a consortium. I'm not sure if that is Hillsboro focused or if that's statewide focused, but we've also been involved on a grant for the National Science Foundation, which is about generating a regional innovation ecosystem. And our application was focused on semiconductor. And we think that if we're able to get that investment, which if we're successful, this would be extraordinarily valuable for the state. We would get up to $160 million over a course of 10 years to really do exactly what you have mentioned, to find a way to knit all of our community college partners, all of our community partners kind of in one room, sharing best practices, figuring out how we can share the learnings of the experts at PCC and Hillsboro and share those with all corners of the state in terms of how we build the workforce pipeline here. So I'm not sure if that answers your question entirely, but we're playing a huge role. So I'd be happy to connect with you and talk about how we can get you and your organizations and partners involved. But
I'd just like, if I have a minute or two to add on to Andrew. Andrew talked a little bit about the portion of the question around what's happening in coordination at the state level, which I think is absolutely imperative, especially as we seek to position the state for some of those federal funding opportunities, especially with the CHIPS and Science Act, and that Science Act piece, especially that folks like Representative Bonamici have really been champions of to not only bring it at a federal scale, but also back here in Oregon. But I want to share just a couple additional pieces too, because it's going to require innovation at the state and local levels here as well. And I just want to build upon a couple of specifics. Didn't touch the bottom. Need better technology. Just kidding. But just a couple of specific examples of where the Oregon spirit of innovation can drive that piece. And it is going to take time. This is also how we ensure opportunities for future Oregonians, not just for those maybe moving to Oregon as well. But in Hillsboro, Christy Wilson, who's our workforce manager embedded within our city staff team, has been coordinating with Dr. Bennings at Portland Community College, the president there, and many others in Hillsboro School District. And we have been trying to pioneer a couple of initiatives, some of them funded by ARPA-related funds, some of them seeking to go after some of these other state opportunities that Andrew alluded to. And two big milestones that we've been able to achieve that get directly at your question are, one, we were able to deploy the first youth apprenticeship program. So this is going to be Mad Libs, so you're going to have to fill in every third word.
Just grab it up higher. Yeah.
All right. How's that better? Okay. So the youth apprenticeship program really digs into our high schools. It's a partnership that right now is happening between two of our advanced manufacturers in Century High School, where they are bringing students that are enrolled in college and career pathway curriculum focused largely into manufacturing and engineering pathways onto business floors, giving them in the field experience, exposing them to manufacturing. That manufacturing is no longer big, dirty smokestacks and foundries of that type. Manufacturing is a highly sophisticated workspace that requires substantial skill training, focus, and pride in terms of the product that you're turning out. And so that's one example. We work with BOLI and others to try to advance that. That's in its infancy. We need to scale programs like that. That reaches deeper into the future generation of our workforce, positioning them now so they can continue to be made available. Another big one is we continue to work with partners such as Centro Prosperidad, which is Centro Cultural and partnership there around skill-up related trainings and work. And that's taking existing workforce, participating workforce in maybe struggling industries or transitioning industries, and starting to help them position to take some jobs as well. And that's in a more immediate way in which we can start to meet this piece. And then lastly, we get a little bit of flack for this, but we have increasingly started to think about workforce as an infrastructure. And some say we're stripping the people connection out of that, and I hope that's not coming from anything that I'm sharing this morning. But we do need to think about the workforce capacity going into these facilities in a similar but different way as we think about the water going into these facilities or the power going into these facilities and the like. And so workforce is a very unique space in that it's like the housing market. There's a buyer's market and a seller's market. And right now, with 2.9% unemployment rate in some parts of the state, businesses are clamoring for workforce anywhere they can find them, bringing high school kids onto their manufacturing floors to start to train them and get them ready for those career opportunities. Now's our chance to engage with those industry partners, what Andrew said, help us fund, help us to further advance in those pathways, have more stake in that game. Because over time, we know that then that buyer's market is going to go to a seller's market. Our unemployment rates are going to tick up. This is why we should continue to seek more advancement of these key industries. And at that point in time is where our community members, our residents are going to be coming to us. Where and how can I find a job? Where and how can I upskill my efforts to get into a better job? Either point in the cycle, workforce investment makes sense.
Thank you. That was, I hope, a very comprehensive response. There is a lot going on. I know just at the high school level, you'll hear a little bit about this tomorrow, but Baker Technical Institute has partnered with the Eastern Oregon University, and they have utilized for years Brownfields as a backbone to place-based training for students to understand sciences, but also to understand a lot of the other soft skills that are needed to work through projects. And they also work a lot with, I'm not sure if Doug Dalton's here, but is he?
Not yet.
Not yet. But they're also working and have applied for a jobs training grant from US EPA that's going to look at being able to train and provide certification for a lot of the environmental science, the environmental support skills that are needed, and truck driving, and large equipment operation. And a lot of that goes back to providing and being able to provide the infrastructure that is needed. If we are putting in more pipe in the ground to provide more water and sewers services to areas, and those systems are becoming more sophisticated, that we need more skilled workforce for those treatment plants. And so all of this comes together. It's full circle when we're looking at it. So I know Salem Kaiser School District is also doing some work with their CTEC. They have a number of really wonderful modules that high school students can come into. And when they graduate, if they choose not to do a university or a college track as their next step going out of high school, they come out with a certificate. And they have a job and they have a skill that they can move into. And it's a much needed one. We still do need the skills that build things, as well as manufacture them, and research them and develop them. Any other questions? One in the back, all the way back.
You mentioned Portland area had about 83 acres that were kind of ready. Can you just go over some of the counties in Oregon that might have either larger tracts that are site ready, or where are we best prepared now if we have a really limited site ready?
Let's repeat the question.
So the question was, if we only have 83 development ready acres in the Portland metro region, where might other regions of the state have more prepared larger lots of land? I think we're soon going to be partnering with the Oregon Economic Development Association to launch a survey to get a better understanding of what the industrial land situation looks like across the state, both in terms of how much land we actually have zoned for industrial and what the status of those lands are. So over the course of that process, we'll have a much better answer for your question. Also related to the Semiconductor Task Force, under the Industrial Land Subcommittee, we've engaged the consulting firm McKinsey to kind of do a little bit of the next step, which is a mapping exercise where we're basically getting a full catalog of all the potential large sites all along the valley over into, including in Bend, also including Ontario, that could be potential strategic sites for semiconductor use. And then the next step is to partner with folks at Business Oregon, DLCD, Department of State Lands, industry themselves, to kind of go through a process of, okay, this site doesn't actually meet industry criteria, or this site does. This site could be served with infrastructure relatively quickly, or this site couldn't. So the result of both of those processes will be able to provide a much better answer to your question. I guess what I would say, though, is that we were told over and over again, and we asked this question a ton of times, is it reasonable to assume or to even try and attract a major fab operation? So like to get Intel to build another R&D fab somewhere outside of the Portland metro region. The answer that we heard repeatedly is that the answer is likely no. That the strength of the cluster in that region is so strong, so close to hyper-talented individuals. That's just where the workers live. But they're also extremely close to very, very specialized suppliers, which they need often on a moment's notice. If a piece of equipment, and Dan can speak to this better than I can, if a piece of equipment goes down, they need to have their supplier in within 30 minutes to rectify what that issue is. Otherwise, you hear the term time is money. It kind of sounds a little smarmy, but it's true. Any downtime at one of these fabs costs millions and millions of dollars for these entities, so they really rely on having suppliers nearby. So for that reason, we were told that that's the reason why we think a lot of this activity is likely to cluster in the Portland metro region. But as Dan mentioned, Intel has suppliers in 15 Oregon counties. Hoffman, its main construction contractor, as it builds out its fabs, has a similar supply chain spread across Oregon. So we think that even if a region might not be super competitive for a development of a new fab in that region, we do think that there's a ton of opportunity for a place like Bend with BaseX to build out some of the supply chain opportunities. Ontario is a great example because of what's going on in Boise and the investments that Micron is making there. That's only an hour outside of Boise. There's a real opportunity for Ontario to attract real supply chain development over there. So that's not a great answer to your question. We're going through some processes to identify exactly where those sites might be, but I hope that gets closer to it.
Thank you. And also think of Climate Falls.
Absolutely. I'm sure they're on the list.
Well, I think we are probably at the end, unless there's another question. Yes, there is.
Hi. You mentioned that other states are better prepared or had taken actions that might make them more competitive than Oregon is, but you have some hope that we could catch up. I'm curious what those actions or things were that made them better and how we might catch up.
Yeah, well, so starting on the positive, I think just last week with Representative Bynum, I was on a call with the White House administrator who's overseeing the CHIPS Act program. And what he really emphasized is that workforce is a major component that they are looking for from the various states. Yeah. Dang it. So a state like Oregon, with our recent investment,
Hers might be the better one.
with our recent investment in Future Ready Oregon, we think that puts us in a pretty significant advantage. And we were actually recently told by folks in the governor's office on a recent trade mission that they took into Europe that international countries, Germany, which is renowned for its ability to train manufacturing workers, looks on Oregon with some admiration for the way that we do workforce. So we feel that we have an advantage in terms of our workforce development. Of course, we need more investment and we need to do more in terms of partnerships and doing a lot of the stuff that Dan mentioned. So on the pro scale, we think that we have an advantage in terms of workforce. The places where we really need help, the two most glaring challenges are on incentives and then on industrial land. So you look at a place like Ohio where Intel announced its $20 billion investment that could eventually one day climb all the way up to $100 million. They had, I think it was a 1,000 acre parcel that, or land aggregated that could eventually get up all the way to 2,000 acres. And if you think about where that land might exist in the metro area, it's pretty hard to find, at least within current urban growth boundaries. But then they also, they bet the farm in terms of the level of incentives that they're offering. We aren't advocating doing the same. We think that we need to be a lot smarter about the incentives that we're offering, but we think that we need to be a lot bolder. So far the reason I'm optimistic is because we've been engaging with a lot of legislators, a lot of community members, and we're seeing a kind of growing swell of a level and sense of urgency. The big question mark is what happens in the election, but we're going to continue to do events like this and speak to folks like this in the room and various legislators and help them understand that by taking bold action on incentives, but smart action, and taking bold action in terms of how we're investing in industrial land and potentially looking at modifications to ensure that our land use system can be made to respond more quickly to emerging economic opportunities, that we have a real competitive chance here because we have 15% of the national chip workforce. We have the densest concentration of chip workers in the country. That's an enormous advantage. Intel has basically made this region one of 3 global centers for the research and design of chips. All of those together are extraordinary advantages that any other ecosystem in the country would basically die for. We just got to be smarter and better on the incentives that we're offering and having the land that these places can actually build on.
That last point Andrew made, for us as Oregonians, cannot go said enough. We are unique from all the other states that have kind of come along lately and tried to jump on this whole bandwagon, some of which are having success, some of which haven't. We have been doing this work. We have been engaged with this industry for the better part of 3 decades. If we continue to rely on that and live in a rearview mirror, our path ahead will not be known and realized. It will slowly start to taper out. Now, if we learn from that and play to that advantage, that is where we align and modify some of our policies and programs, as we've talked about today. is a far superior competitive advantage for us as a state compared to almost any other of those 49 states that decides to try to rise up and compete and be on that level playing field.
I think that's great. Thank you all for staying so engaged. I think we've had an amazing discussion here. Thank you, Andrew and Dan, for sharing so much with all of us as we start off the next 2 days, this day and tomorrow. Thank you.
I echo your comments, Karen, again, thank you. Thank you for a great, thoughtful conversation about the opportunities and challenges we face.